A scarred canine refused to heal, and a child lived to tell it. But when the van door slid open, what they found inside changed the whole case. The night was still and heavy, the kind that made every street lamp buzz louder than usual, the kind where shadows seemed to stretch further than they should. Officer Daniel Hayes drove slowly through the quiet neighborhood, his patrol car rolling over wet asphalt that reflected the dull glow of yellow light. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Rex, his canine partner, a German shepherd with a scar that cut across his muzzle like a memory carved into skin. Rex was older now, his black and tan coat peppered with gray, but his eyes burned sharp and restless, always scanning, always listening. For Daniel, the silence of the night was almost comforting. After years on the force, a night like this meant paperwork, maybe a noise complaint, nothing serious. The radio whispered static, and Daniel leaned back against the seat, sipping lukewarm coffee, thinking about how tired he was. Rex, though, was never tired. His ears twitched with every hum, his nose pressed to the cold crack of the window. When Daniel turned down Oak Ridge Avenue, Rex shifted in his seat, the muscles in his body tightening. A low rumble started in his chest, a warning that made the small hairs rise on Daniel's arms. "Easy, boy," Daniel muttered, pulling slightly at the leash clipped to Rex's harness. He had heard that growl 100 times before, sometimes at raccoons, sometimes at nothing at all. Rex had instincts, yes, but instincts could be wrong. "Heel," Daniel said firmly. The command was clear. Obedience was everything in their line of work. But Rex didn't listen. His growl deepened, vibrating like a low drumbeat. He shifted forward, pressing against the dashboard, his paws twitching, his nose flaring at the air that slipped through the crack in the window. Daniel frowned, irritation settling in. The dog had been restless before, especially after long shifts, but tonight was supposed to be routine. "Rex, heel," he repeated, sharper this time, tugging the leash. Still the shepherd refused, his amber eyes locked on something outside, something Daniel couldn't see. The officer's jaw tightened. He was in control, not the dog. That was the rule. The car slowed as Daniel scanned the sidewalks. Empty porches, trimmed hedges, curtains drawn tight. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. But Rex's body told a different story. His hackles were raised, his chest rising and falling in short, urgent bursts, his entire frame leaning toward the passenger door, like he was ready to leap through it. Daniel sighed, running a hand over his face. He trusted Rex more than most people, trusted him with his life. But he also knew dogs could chase ghosts. A rustling bush, a stray cat, even the faint scent of another animal could set him off. Still, something about the dog's intensity made Daniel hesitate. It wasn't just restlessness, it was focus. The kind of focus that had saved them both more than once. He tugged the leash again, softer this time, his voice caught between command and doubt. "What is it, boy?" he asked under his breath. Rex didn't move, didn't blink. His gaze stayed fixed on the shadows at the far end of the street, and his growl cut deeper, sharper, as though the darkness itself had shifted. Daniel adjusted his grip on the wheel, a knot forming in his stomach. Routine patrols were supposed to be boring. Tonight, he wasn't so sure. Ethan's sneakers slapped against the sidewalk in a steady rhythm, the straps of his backpack swinging against his side with each step. The street was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made his small shoulders tense as he glanced over his shoulder. He told himself it was fine, that he had only stayed a little too long at his friend's house playing video games, that his mom would be waiting with the porch light on when he turned the corner. But the stillness pressed against his ears, and under that stillness came another sound, softer but steady, footsteps behind him. He tried to brush it off at first, convincing himself it was nothing. Maybe another neighbor walking home, maybe someone out for a late jog. But when he looked again, his stomach tightened. A man in a hooded jacket was behind him, not far, not close enough to bump into him, but close enough that Ethan could see the shine of damp fabric under the street lamp. The man's head was tilted down, his face shadowed, his steps measured. Ethan looked away quickly, heart racing faster than his feet. He pulled his backpack higher onto his shoulders and picked up his pace. His small legs moved quicker, his breath louder in his ears. The footsteps matched him, faster now, like an echo he couldn't shake. He tried to tell himself again that it was a coincidence, that people walked down streets all the time. But the rhythm was wrong, too exact, too deliberate. Ethan crossed the street without checking for cars, his sneakers splashing through a shallow puddle. He thought maybe he could trick the man, maybe he'd keep going straight while Ethan veered off. But when he glanced sideways, the hooded figure had crossed too, never breaking stride. Ethan's chest grew tight, his fingers gripping the straps of his bag like a lifeline. He wanted to run, every nerve in his body screamed at him to run, but he was only 9 years old, and his legs were short, his lungs small. Running might make things worse. He remembered what his mom always said: stay calm, don't panic, keep moving toward the lights, toward safety. So he kept walking, faster, faster, his breath shallow, his eyes darting to the glowing porch lights ahead. He could almost see his house, almost feel the relief of the front door clicking shut behind him. Behind him, the man quickened too. The sound of his shoes striking the wet pavement echoed closer. Ethan's hands began to shake. He felt the cold air bite his face, but sweat trickled down his neck. He whispered to himself, "Just a little further, just a little further." He told himself he was imagining the way the man's shadow stretched longer under the street lamp, the way his shoulders rolled forward as though ready to pounce. Then the man spoke, his voice low and sharp. "Hey kid." Just 2 words, but they froze Ethan's blood. He didn't answer, didn't look back. He only gripped his backpack tighter and pushed his legs to move faster, his mind screaming with the one truth he could no longer deny. He wasn't imagining it. Someone was after him. Rex lunged forward with such force that the leash burned against Daniel's palm, the shepherd's body surging with a strength that felt less like eagerness and more like desperation. Daniel planted his boots against the wet pavement, his voice snapping out in the practiced tone of command, sharp enough to cut through most situations. "Rex, heel." But the dog didn't stop. His muscles bunched, his paws clawing for traction, his entire body quivering like a coiled spring. The low growl that rumbled from his chest wasn't the restless sound Daniel knew from false alarms. It was deeper, edged with urgency, a sound that vibrated with instinct. Daniel cursed under his breath and yanked again, but Rex pulled harder, dragging him several steps closer to the corner. "Enough, boy," he hissed, glancing around. Empty yards, quiet houses, the occasional flicker of a television through curtains. Nothing that screamed danger, nothing to explain the way Rex's hackles stood bristling, his amber eyes locked on something ahead. Then Daniel saw the boy. Small frame, a backpack bouncing against narrow shoulders, sneakers slapping against the damp sidewalk. 9 maybe, 10 at most. Walking too fast, shoulders hunched, his head darting nervously like a rabbit, aware of the hawk circling above. And behind him, a figure in a hooded jacket moving with deliberate steps, too close, too focused. Daniel slowed, doubt creeping in. It could be nothing, he told himself. Maybe a father and son heading home. Maybe neighbors on the same path. The last thing he wanted was to jump at shadows and embarrass himself with a false call. He had seen Rex overreact before, barking at harmless drunks or pacing when a jogger passed too near. But something in the shepherd's body, the way it shook with restrained energy, the way his ears were locked forward, and his growl deepened with every step closer, made Daniel hesitate. He tugged at the leash again, softer this time, his voice losing its edge. "Rex, easy." But the dog didn't ease. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, his nostrils flaring as if the scent of danger was thick in the air. His body lowered slightly, not in fear, but in readiness. The boy quickened his pace. The hooded man matched him. Rex lunged again, nearly wrenching the leash from Daniel's grip. "Damn it," Daniel muttered, his jaw tight. He could feel the conflict building inside him. Duty against instinct. Rules against trust. If Rex was wrong, if this was some harmless stranger, he'd be explaining himself for weeks. But if Rex was right, if danger really was unfolding just yards away, hesitation could cost everything. The shepherd gave another pull, a sharp jerk that almost dropped Daniel to his knees. His growl tore through the night, no longer a warning, but a demand. Daniel's pulse quickened as he watched the hooded man lean closer to the boy, saw the boy glance back with wide, terrified eyes. In that instant, Daniel knew Rex wasn't mistaken. The dog wasn't guessing. He wasn't restless. He was certain. And certainty in Rex had saved lives before. Daniel tightened his grip, breath catching in his chest. Whatever was happening, they were seconds away from finding out. The man's lunge was sudden, violent, like a shadow breaking loose from the night itself. His hand clamped around Ethan's thin arm and yanked hard, jerking the boy off balance. Ethan screamed, a sound that sliced through the still air, his backpack tumbling to the ground with a heavy thud. The zipper split open, and books scattered across the sidewalk, sliding in the wet streetlight. The man hissed words Ethan couldn't fully hear, his voice low and cruel. But the meaning was clear enough. He was pulling, dragging, his grip iron tight as he forced the boy toward the curb, where a dark van idled with its engine running, its windows blacked out, waiting like a predator in the shadows. Ethan twisted, clawing at the man's sleeve, his sneakers scraping against the pavement, his chest heaving with panic. He cried out again, high and desperate, his voice cracking into sobs. The man cursed and tightened his grip, bending low to whisper a threat, a warning to keep quiet. But Ethan fought harder, his small body thrashing with every ounce of strength he had. Daniel's eyes widened as the scene unfolded in front of him. His hand flew for the radio clipped to his vest, but he knew he was already too late. He shouted into the darkness, his voice rough with command. "Police! Let him go!" But the man didn't flinch, didn't even slow down, his focus locked on shoving the boy into the side door of the van. Rex didn't wait for permission. The German shepherd launched forward with explosive force, his leash snapping taut before it ripped free from Daniel's hand. His paws pounded against the sidewalk, his body a blur of muscle and fury. His growl rose from deep in his chest, a sound so primal it made the night itself seem to recoil. The man jerked his head up at the noise, his eyes flashing in the glow of the street lamp. Too late! Rex collided with him like a missile, his jaws clamping down on the man's forearm with crushing strength. The stranger screamed, a raw, shocked cry, stumbling back as the boy was torn from his grip. Ethan hit the ground hard, scraping his knees, but scrambled away on all fours, gasping, "Help! Help!" The van door slid open with a metallic scrape, another figure half rising inside, but froze when he saw the shepherd's teeth buried deep, blood streaking down the man's sleeve. Rex shook his head with brutal force, growling louder, refusing to let go even as the man swung his free hand wildly, trying to hit him, trying to pry him off. Daniel was running now, his gun drawn, his voice booming down the street. "Police! Hands where I can see them!" He moved toward Ethan first, grabbing the boy's arm and pulling him safely behind him, his own body shielding the child. His other hand kept the weapon steady on the van, his eyes darting between the open door and the struggling attacker. The man staggered, blood pouring, his curses louder, his knife suddenly flashing in his free hand. He swung down, the blade slicing across Rex's flank. The shepherd yelped but didn't release. His jaws only locked tighter, his growl turning into a snarl of defiance. The man's strength faltered as pain and panic consumed him. Neighbors began opening doors, porch lights flaring, shouts echoing as more eyes witnessed the scene. The van's engine revved, the accomplice inside slamming the door shut and speeding away, tires screeching into the night. But Rex had stopped the grab, Stop the abduction before it could vanish into the dark. Ethan clung to Daniel's uniform, sobbing, his body trembling against the officer's side. "He saved me," the boy choked out, pointing to the shepherd still latched onto the man's arm, eyes burning with fierce, unshakable purpose. Daniel's voice rang out sharp and commanding, the kind of tone that usually snapped Rex into obedience without hesitation. "Rex, heel!" But the words were swallowed by the night, ignored as if they had never been spoken. The shepherd's body had already chosen its path. He surged forward again, muscles coiling and releasing like springs, his paws striking the ground in quick, violent rhythm. His jaws opened wide, teeth flashing in the harsh glow of the street lamp, and then he hit. The impact sent the stranger stumbling back, his hood falling askew, his face twisting in shock and fury. Rex clamped down on the man's wrist with bone, crushing force, the sound of teeth meeting flesh, sharp and sickening. The man screamed, a raw sound that cracked through the neighborhood, his free hand flailing as he tried to fight the dog off. His grip on Ethan broke instantly. The boy tumbled to the sidewalk, knees scraping, palms stinging as he caught himself. Tears blurred his vision, but instinct drove him to scramble backward, away from the chaos, his breath coming in quick sobs. Daniel's heart pounded as he saw the boy freed, relief and fear tangling together. He shouted again, his voice breaking with urgency. "Rex, release! Heel! Now!" But the shepherd's ears were deaf to the order. His growl rumbled like thunder, his teeth locked deeper as the man thrashed, trying to wrench his arm free. Blood streaked down the stranger's sleeve, dripping onto the pavement in dark lines. The man staggered sideways, slamming his back against the side of the van that had been waiting. His other hand darted toward his pocket, and in one motion, a blade flashed under the light. Daniel raised his weapon, shouting a warning, but before he could fire, the knife came down in a wild arc toward the shepherd's back. Rex twisted, the blade grazing across his flank, opening a line of red. He yelped, but only for a heartbeat, then dug in harder, jaws refusing to let go. Ethan pressed himself against a fence, his small hands over his mouth, tears streaking his cheeks. He wanted to look away but couldn't. His wide eyes stayed locked on the shepherd who had saved him, the dog who refused to listen to anything but his own instincts. Daniel's training told him control was slipping, that a dog ignoring commands was a liability, but his gut knew better. Rex wasn't failing. He was fighting with a certainty that no order could shake. Daniel tightened his grip on his gun, every nerve on edge, his focus darting between the knife and the boy and the shepherd who seemed willing to give everything to keep the child safe. The stranger's screams grew hoarse, his swings weaker. Rex shook his head violently, dragging the man down to his knees, pinning him against the pavement. Neighbors shouted from porches, phones raised, lights pouring onto the street. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Daniel finally exhaled, lowering his weapon just slightly. Rex hadn't obeyed, but in that disobedience, he had done the one thing no command could guarantee. He had saved the boy. The night tore apart in an instant, the calm shattered by screams and snarls, by the metallic scrape of a blade flashing under the street lamp. The stranger's free hand yanked a knife from his pocket, his movements wild, frantic. Fueled by the desperation of someone cornered, he slashed downward, the blade catching Rex across the flank. The shepherd yelped, a sharp cry of pain, but his jaws did not loosen. His teeth were locked on the man's wrist like steel, his growl deep and unbroken, the sound of defiance that dared the world to try and take him away. Blood streaked across his fur, dark and slick, but still he held on. Daniel's boots pounded against the pavement as he reached them, his heart hammering hard enough to drown out everything else. His gun was already drawn, his hands steady though his mind was racing. He shouted commands, his voice raw, demanding the man drop the weapon, demanding him to stop fighting. But the stranger was too far gone, swinging the blade in frantic arcs that caught air, that caught sparks against the pavement. Each strike a blur of danger, too close to the boy trembling behind the fence. Ethan's sobs carried through the chaos. His small body pressed against the wooden slats, his fingers clawing at them as if he could disappear into the cracks. He couldn't take his eyes off Rex, off the blood on his coat, off the terrible sound of metal slicing the air. Tears spilled hot down his cheeks, his voice breaking as he whispered again and again, "Please, don't let him die." Porch lights flicked on one by one, cutting through the shadows. Neighbors stepped out in robes and slippers, gasping at the scene unfolding in the street. Phones were raised, calls already rushing to dispatch, voices carrying panic and disbelief. The sound of sirens swelled in the distance, but for now it was only Daniel, only Rex, and the man who refused to let go of violence. The knife came down again, glancing against Rex's shoulder, but the dog twisted his body, pulling the man off balance, dragging him toward the ground. His growl grew louder, vibrating through the night, the sound of a warrior who would not surrender. The stranger screamed curses, his voice cracking as blood poured from the mangled wrist. His strength faltered, his slashes weaker, but still he fought, clawing at the shepherd's fur, trying to tear him away. Daniel moved closer, his gun aimed steady, his voice booming, "Drop it now!" He could see the man's eyes, wide and frantic, darting between the officer's weapon and the dog that refused to release him. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought he might try to throw the knife at him. But the blade wavered, the stranger's knees buckled, and Rex seized the chance. He jerked hard, pulling the man flat onto the pavement, pinning him down with every pound of his weight. The street filled with the sound of neighbors gasping, of children crying from open doors, of the wail of sirens rushing closer. The image burned into every eye that witnessed it. The scarred shepherd holding a predator down with nothing but his teeth and his courage, his blood mixing with the attackers on the wet pavement. It was a moment no one there would ever forget. Sirens filled the night, sharp and rising, the kind of sound that made every window on the block tremble. Red and blue lights painted the houses as patrol cars skidded to a stop, doors flying open, officers rushing out with weapons drawn. Daniel held his stance, his gun steady, until he felt the weight of his fellow officers around him. Only then did he allow himself a breath, only then did he shout the command for Rex to release. The shepherd hesitated, jaws still locked in fury, but after one final growl he let go. The man collapsed onto the pavement, clutching at his shredded wrist, blood running down his sleeve, his face twisted in hate and pain. Officers swarmed him, forcing him flat, pressing a knee into his back while snapping cold metal cuffs around his wrists. He spat curses at the ground, words sharp with venom, his eyes darting toward the boy who stood trembling behind Daniel's leg. "You don't know who you're messing with," the man hissed, his voice cracked and bitter. One officer shoved his head down, reading him his rights over the sound of sirens and radios crackling. The van, still humming at the curb, was surrounded. Flashlights cut through its dark interior as officers ripped the doors open. The scene inside sent a chill down Daniel's spine. Zip ties lay in a plastic bag on the passenger seat. Rolls of duct tape sat stacked beside bottles labeled chloroform, the sharp chemical stench hitting the air as one officer lifted the cap. A rag, already damp, was crumpled in the cup holder. It wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't a maybe. This man had planned to take the boy. He had come prepared to disappear him. Neighbors whispered from their porches, hands over mouths, eyes wide at the proof of it all. Someone sobbed openly, the sound carrying across the street. Others filmed with shaking phones, their voices narrating in disbelief. Ethan pressed himself tighter against Daniel, his fingers clutching the officer's uniform with a desperation that shook the man to his core. The boy's cheeks were wet with tears, his breath ragged, his small frame trembling with every hiccuping sob. Daniel dropped his free hand to the boy's shoulder, steady, firm, trying to anchor him to something safe. "You're all right now," he murmured, though his own chest felt tight. "You're safe." Beside them, Rex lowered himself to the ground, his sides heaving as he panted. Blood seeped from the slice across his flank, staining the sidewalk beneath him, but his eyes never wavered. They stayed locked on Ethan, as if guarding him even now, as if nothing else in the world mattered. His ears twitched with every noise, but his gaze softened when the boy finally dared to glance down at him. For a moment, Ethan let go of Daniel's sleeve and reached out with a shaking hand. His fingers brushed the shepherd's scarred head, and Rex exhaled a deep, weary huff, leaning gently into the touch. The stranger screamed again as he was shoved into the back of a patrol car, his voice cracking against the night. But it no longer mattered. The evidence was there. His power was gone. He had failed. The street that moments ago had been filled with terror now pulsed with the raw sound of relief, the kind that only came when survival replaced fear. And in the center of it all, a boy, an officer, and a battered shepherd sat together, bound by something stronger than commands, stronger than blood they had endured. The drive to the trauma unit felt endless, even though the sirens carved a clear path through the streets. Daniel sat in the back of the cruiser with Ethan pressed against him. The boy's small fingers locked around his hand so tightly it hurt. Ethan's cheeks were streaked with tears, his eyes red and swollen. But he didn't cry loudly anymore. His words came in whispers, broken and shaky, repeating the same plea over and over again. "He saved me. Don't let him die." Daniel could barely look at him without feeling the twist of guilt coiled deeper in his chest. He wanted to promise, to swear Rex would make it, but the shepherd's blood on his uniform was too fresh. The memory of the knife slicing across his flank, too sharp. At the veterinary trauma unit, a team was already waiting. The doors flew open, and Rex was wheeled inside on a gurney, his body strapped down, IV lines already taped to his legs. His head lifted weakly as they rolled him past, his amber eyes searching for Ethan, catching him for just a second before disappearing through swinging doors. Ethan lunged forward, as if to follow, but Daniel scooped him back, kneeling to hold his trembling shoulders. "They have to work on him, buddy," he said, his voice raw. "We can't go in there right now." Ethan shook his head, his tears spilling again. "But he'll be scared without me. He needs me." Daniel pulled him close, holding the boy against his chest, feeling how small and fragile he was, how fiercely he clung. It was more than a child's panic. It was love, the kind that had been earned in trust and loyalty, the kind that wouldn't let go even when blood stained the floor. Hours crawled by in the waiting room. The hum of machines and the faint voices of staff behind closed doors only sharpened the silence. Daniel sat slumped in a hard plastic chair, Ethan curled against him, the boy's head heavy on his shoulder, his hand never leaving his. Every time a door opened, Ethan's eyes flickered up, desperate for news, but no one came. Daniel's mind replayed the night again and again. Rex breaking heel, ignoring every sharp command, charging forward when Daniel had tried to hold him back. Years of training told Daniel a disobedient dog was dangerous, but tonight it was that very defiance that saved Ethan. If Rex had listened, if he had obeyed, the boy would be gone. The thought made Daniel's throat tighten. He had doubted Rex, pulled him back, nearly cost a child his life. The shepherd had trusted himself more than his handler, and that trust had been right. Ethan stirred and whispered again, his words hoarse but steady. "He saved me." Daniel laid a hand over the boy's, his gaze heavy on the closed trauma doors. "I know, kid," he murmured. "And now, we've got to believe he'll save himself." The morning after the attack, the police station buzzed like a hive, every desk piled with files, every phone ringing with urgency. Daniel sat at the edge of it all, a cup of cold coffee untouched in front of him, his eyes fixed on the photographs spread across the table. The man they had arrested was no stranger to the system. His name was already known to detectives and prosecutors, tied to cases that had slipped through the cracks, charges that had vanished with technicalities, victims too young or too frightened to testify. He was a repeat offender, A predator who had managed to vanish into the background again and again. Now, with the van searched and evidence spread out like a map of intent, the truth was clear. He hadn't been working alone. Federal agents moved in quickly, their jackets marked in bold letters, their voices brisk and clipped as they organized files, traced phone calls, and spread photographs across bulletin boards. Each new thread they uncovered pulled tighter around a larger network, one that stretched across cities, using youth programs and shelters as traps. What had happened to Ethan was not an isolated grab. It was part of something bigger, something organized, something ruthless. The air in the squad room grew heavier, with every new detail pinned to the wall. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand across his tired face. He couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been, how easily Ethan could have been shoved into that van and disappeared forever. If not for Rex. The shepherd had seen what Daniel refused to believe. He had felt it in the tension of the air, in the boy's hurried steps, in the shadow that lingered too close. Daniel had pulled at his leash, given him orders, told him to stop, and Rex hadn't listened. That single act of disobedience was the reason the child sat safe in a waiting room instead of on a missing poster. The guilt pressed down hard on Daniel's chest. He had spent years drilling control into Rex, years teaching him to obey no matter what. And when the moment came, the dog had chosen his own instincts over every rule. Daniel knew he should feel frustration, should be worried about the reports and the judgment of superiors. But instead, he felt something else. Relief, gratitude, humility. Ethan's name was mentioned over and over as agents connected dots, his rescue already being written into reports as the break that had blown the case open. Daniel glanced through the glass window toward the hallway, where the boy sat curled in a chair with a blanket around his shoulders. His head rested against the wall, his eyes closed, but his small hand still clutched the drawing he had made that morning, a stick figure of himself, a taller one of Daniel, and beside them a dog with big ears and a wide smile. Across the top he had written in uneven letters, "My hero Rex." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes burning as he looked back at the files. Without Rex's defiance, that drawing would never have been made. The boy would have been gone, just another name in a case file. And Daniel would have carried the weight of knowing he had ordered his partner to stand down when he should have trusted him. For the first time in years, Daniel Hayes understood that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty wasn't obedience. Sometimes it was the courage to break the rules to save a life. The sterile smell of the veterinary clinic clung to everything, sharp and clean. But underneath it lingered the heavier scent of blood and medicine. Daniel had walked these halls more times than he could count, yet each step felt heavier now. He pushed open the door to the recovery room, his chest tight, his eyes going first to the corner kennel where Rex lay. The shepherd looked smaller than he ever had before, wrapped in white bandages that peeked through his dark fur, an IV line taped neatly against his leg, the steady hum of the monitor keeping time with his slow breaths. His eyes were half closed, heavy with drugs and exhaustion, but when Daniel's boots scuffed against the floor, those amber eyes lifted, searching until they found him. The door creaked again, and a small figure slipped in beside him. Ethan carried something clutched against his chest, his steps quiet, careful, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the room. His eyes went straight to Rex, and for the first time in days, his lips curved into the faintest smile. In his hands was a sheet of paper, wrinkled at the corners, colored with thick crayon lines. 3 figures stood under a bright yellow sun, one tall with a square badge drawn on his chest, one small with stick arms and a wide grin, and between them a dog with big ears and a proud tail. Above them in shaky letters was written, "My family." Daniel's throat tightened as he watched the boy press the drawing gently against the glass of the kennel. He smoothed the tape down with careful fingers, the paper now a bright patch against the dull metal and the bandages inside. "So he won't forget," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling but hopeful. Inside the kennel, Rex's gaze shifted to the picture, then back to the boy. His tail gave a slow, heavy thump against the blanket. Weak but sure, the sound echoing like a heartbeat in the quiet room. Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't the panicked tears of that night. They were softer, overflowing with relief. He knelt down so his face was level with Rex's, pressing his small hands against the glass. "Thank you for not listening," he whispered, his words shaky but full of weight. "If you listened, I wouldn't be here." Rex's eyes blinked slowly, and another thump of his tail came, as if to say, he understood. Daniel stood behind them, silent, his heart caught between pride and shame. He remembered every command he had barked, every order ignored, and he knew now that the shepherd's refusal had been more than disobedience. It had been judgment, instinct, love. Ethan leaned his forehead against the kennel, his breath fogging the glass. "Get better, okay? Because I still need you." The boy stayed like that, whispering small words only the dog could hear, until finally Rex's eyes closed again, the steady rhythm of his breathing unchanged but comforted. Daniel placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, steadying him. Together they stood in the quiet, watching the dog who had broken the rules and in doing so had saved them both. The police department's briefing room had never felt so full. Folding chairs lined the walls, cameras flashed from every corner, and the steady hum of voices quieted the moment the chief stepped up to the podium. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready, microphones raised. Officers in uniform stood at the back, their badges gleaming, while neighbors and families filled the front rows. At the center of it all, resting on a clean blanket at Daniel's feet, sat Rex. Bandages still wrapped his side, and his gait was slower, but his ears were high, his posture proud, his eyes scanning the crowd with the same steady focus that had once cut through the shadows of a street. Daniel shifted his weight, uneasy with the attention, his hand resting on Rex's leash. He hadn't wanted the ceremony. He thought medals and speeches could never capture what had really happened that night, but the department insisted. And as the chief's voice filled the room, steady and deep, Daniel realized it wasn't about recognition for him. It was for the shepherd who had refused to yield, who had saved a child when orders would have failed. The chief spoke of loyalty and bravery, of instincts sharper than fear, of a partner who had stepped beyond training to protect the most vulnerable. Then he crouched down, his large hands surprisingly gentle, as he clipped a shining medal to Rex's collar. The inscription glinted under the lights. "For valor above orders." The room erupted into applause, loud and unrestrained, the sound bouncing off the walls. Rex's ears flicked, his tail gave one slow wag, and for a brief moment, the old dog seemed to understand. Reporters surged forward, calling questions, cameras clicking like a storm. Daniel tried to step back, tried to shield Rex from the chaos, but before he could, a small voice rose above the noise. Ethan stood at the edge of the stage, his crayon drawing clutched in his hand, the same one taped to Rex's kennel days before. His eyes were wide but steady, as he took a shaky step forward, then another. The crowd hushed, curious, the boy's small presence commanding a silence no badge could demand. He looked down at Rex, then back at the sea of faces, and his voice carried clear, higher than the microphones, stronger than his tears. "He didn't follow the rules," Ethan said, holding the drawing against his chest. "He followed his heart. That's why I'm here." The words landed with a weight heavier than the chief's speech, heavier than the medal itself. Reporters lowered their cameras, officers bowed their heads, neighbors wiped at their eyes. Daniel felt his throat tighten as he glanced at the boy, then down at his partner. Rex looked back at him with tired but shining eyes, and Daniel understood that this moment was bigger than commands, bigger than obedience. It was about trust, about the bond that had saved a child's life. Applause swelled again, but softer now, full of reverence. And in the middle of it all, Rex sat with his medal gleaming, a shepherd honored not for obedience but for courage, not for silence but for the heart that refused to let go. The weeks that followed unfolded like falling dominoes. The evidence taken from the van, led investigators to warehouses, back alleys, and safe houses scattered across the state. One arrest became three, three became a dozen, and soon entire cells of the trafficking ring were dismantled. Headlines carried the story. Words like sting operation and federal sweep plastered across front pages. Reporters eager to connect it all back to the boy rescued in the street and the scarred German shepherd who had refused to let go. Cameras pointed at Daniel, microphones shoved toward his face, but he never cared for the spotlight. He answered what he had to, gave the facts, and then went home. Because for Daniel, the real story wasn't in the headlines. It wasn't in the number of arrests or the photos of boxes stacked with evidence. It lived in the quiet moments that followed, when the world wasn't looking, when it was just him, the boy, and the dog. He found himself thinking about it at night, about the way Rex had pulled against his leash, about the way he had ignored every sharp command. Years of training said it was failure, but in truth, it was the opposite. Rex had known better. He had trusted himself when his handler hesitated. That defiance had saved a child's life. Daniel carried the weight of that realization with him, humbling and sharp. Sometimes rules weren't enough. Sometimes a partner's instincts were the only compass worth following. Ethan began visiting the station often, his mother dropping him off with a wave and a smile that was both grateful and tired. He would walk the halls with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, always making his way to the kennel where Rex rested between shifts. The boy would press his face against the bars, whispering secrets only the shepherd could hear. And every time, without fail, Rex's tail would thump against the floor, weak at first, stronger as the weeks went by, a rhythm of recognition and joy. Neighbors noticed it too. Passing the station, they would see a boy pausing on the sidewalk, waving through the glass as if greeting an old friend. And inside, the shepherd would rise, bandages long gone now, ears perked, eyes bright, pressing his nose against the barrier as if to wave back. For Ethan, it became a ritual, a reminder that even in a world full of shadows, someone would always be watching. Someone would always be ready to break the rules to protect him. Daniel often stood back, watching those moments with quiet pride. He saw more than a boy and a dog. He saw a bond forged in fear and sealed with courage, something no training manual could ever teach. He knew then that trust wasn't about commands shouted in the dark. It was about listening, about believing, even when it went against everything you thought you knew. The world would remember Rex as the dog who stopped a predator. For Daniel and Ethan, he was something more. He was family, proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disobey. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you liked this story, show your support with a like, and join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.